They flew with death in their hearts. Young men who climbed into planes, knowing they would never come back. They carried no parachutes, no escape plans. Only one mission, to die for their country. They called them Kamikaze, the divine wind. But for the men who became that wind, it was not divine. It was human, terrifyingly human. The word kamikaze comes from an ancient legend. In the 13th century, Japan was saved from a Mongol invasion when a massive typhoon destroyed the enemy fleet. They called it the divine wind sent by the gods. Centuries later, in the final desperate years of World War II, Japan would try to summon that wind again. But this time, it came in the form of young men. By 1944, Japan was losing the war. Their navy shattered, their air force weakened, and their empire shrinking by the day. The United States was closing in, island by island, battle by battle. The high command needed a miracle, and so they turned men into weapons. October 25, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. A group of young pilots gathered around a commander. They were told they had been chosen for a special attack unit. Their mission, crash directly into enemy ships. There would be no return. One pilot reportedly smiled and said, "If my death can save Japan, then let me fly first." That morning, they took off into the clouds. Moments later, one of them dove straight into the USS St. Lo. A massive explosion tore the carrier apart. It became the first ship in history sunk by a kamikaze. Japan celebrated. The generals called it divine sacrifice. But for the pilots, it was only the beginning of the end. They were not fanatics. Most were barely 20 years old. Students, farmers, sons. They had dreams, friends, and families waiting at home. But through months of propaganda and pressure, they were told that dying for the emperor was the greatest honor a man could achieve. Letters recovered after the war show the truth behind their smiles. One pilot wrote, "Mother, I am afraid, but I will not show it. When you hear of my death, please do not cry too much." Another wrote, "I want to live, but I am doing this so others may live after me." They were trained for only a few days. They were taught how to take off, not how to land. Their aircraft were loaded with explosives, fuel tanks overfilled to burn longer. Each mission was one way. By 1945, kamikaze attacks became Japan's main defense. The skies over Okinawa turned into hell. Allied ships were under constant assault. Waves of aircraft diving from the clouds like burning meteors. The pilots shouted, "Tenno Heika Banzai!" "Long live the Emperor!" before slamming into the steel decks. Each impact shook the sea. Each explosion sent fire hundreds of feet into the air. For the Americans watching from below, it was the most horrifying sight of the war. For the pilots, it was the last. In one letter found on a crashed plane, a pilot wrote, "When I close my eyes, I see the faces of those I love. I hope they will forgive me. I will become the wind." They believed their deaths would protect their families, their emperor, their homeland. But in truth, Japan was already collapsing. At the airfields, the mood was strangely calm. The night before their mission, pilots drank sake, sang songs, wrote their final letters. Some smiled for photos beside their aircraft. Others cried quietly under the stars. Their commanders gave them a white scarf, hachimaki, symbol of purity and resolve. When dawn came, they lined up in formation. Engines roared. One by one, the planes lifted off, slowly, heavily, like birds carrying too much weight. And as they vanished into the horizon, the men on the ground saluted. They knew they would never see those pilots again. Imagine the silence inside that cockpit, the engine screaming, the ocean glittering below, and the target, a massive American carrier, growing larger every second. The pilot grips the controls tighter. He whispers a prayer, and then pushes the stick forward. The sky tilts, gravity pulls, wind howls through the cockpit. The ship fills his vision, and then a flash. In one heartbeat, man and machine become fire. The explosion lights up the sky, and another name disappears into history. By the end of the war, nearly 3,800 kamikaze pilots had died. They sank or damaged more than 300 Allied ships. Over 7,000 sailors were killed. But it changed nothing. The war continued. Japan surrendered months later, not because of the kamikaze, but because of the atomic bomb. The divine wind that was supposed to save Japan only took more lives. After the surrender, the truth of the kamikaze became a wound Japan struggled to face. Some called them heroes, others called them victims, but all agreed they were young men caught in a war they could not control. At the Chiran Peace Museum, their letters are displayed, thousands of them, written in careful ink, full of love and fear. Visitors still read them and cry. One final letter says, "I wish there had been another way, but this is my fate. Please do not let anyone forget us." Even decades later, survivors who worked with kamikaze units still remember their faces, laughing, smiling, pretending not to be afraid. They were boys sent to die for a lost cause. The kamikaze became one of the most haunting symbols of the Pacific War. Bravery, sacrifice, and tragedy intertwined. Their story forces us to ask, what makes a human willing to die for an idea? And at what point does loyalty become madness? The Japanese government today honors them as part of the war dead, not glorified, but remembered. Because forgetting them would mean forgetting the lesson their deaths left behind. They called themselves the divine wind, but there was nothing divine about their suffering. They were sons, brothers, lovers, turned into fire by the madness of war. And though the skies above the Pacific are quiet now, if you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of engines, the roar of sacrifice, and the whisper of young men who became the wind.